Our first guest then on tonight's edition of the show, none other than Jeff Carlisle. You can find all his great work over on our website, ESPN.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Jeffrey Carlisle. Jeff, welcome back to Fútbol America. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, Jeff, we got some heavy news to get to. Now, last week I was covering the U.S. women's national team at the She Believes Cup, and we got the news that everybody around American soccer had been waiting for. There's finally a settlement between the women's national team and the U.S. Soccer Federation over that long equal pay lawsuit. However, as always, there's an asterisk. This deal doesn't get pushed across the line until the women have a new CBA with the Federation. So give us the details on that. Where do we stand on that critical part of this settlement?
Well, talks are ongoing, and this is going to extend, pretty far beyond, the election for USSF president, which is set to take place this weekend. I'm told that there have been almost 2 weeks, starting on March 14th, blocked off to get this settlement done. And this is having to happen hand in hand with what the men are going through. I mean, the men are negotiating their own CBA. And they're the ones that are going to have to agree to share the World Cup revenue, or at least the bonus revenue that either team would get, in a tournament. So, there's some moving parts here, but we'll see, how things transpire. But again, this is, the talks are ongoing, and a lot will happen, or a lot will depend on who gets elected president on Saturday, whether that's Carlos Cordero or the incumbent Cindy Parlow-Cone.
Jeff, you mentioned the men's CBA still ongoing. How will the women's search of equal pay affect the men in their CBA?
I have a sense that eventually the two sides are going to come together on that the men and the women are going to figure out a way, to share that piece of the pie. I think what could get tricky is that the men agreed to a deal, or thought that they had agreed to a deal, last June. And they are very intent on maintaining the terms of that agreement that they thought they had. The men's union had agreed with Will Wilson on a particular deal. And then when it was presented to the board of directors said, no, we're not going to agree to this deal. And that's created a little bit of ill will on the men's side. So ultimately, I don't think the sticking point is going to be sharing the World Cup revenue, but it's going to be, can the men agree to these terms that they thought they had, last summer? So that's a little bit of a tricky dynamic, I think. And again, we'll see what gets agreed to for the women's deal as well as the men's deal.
Jeff, what's taken so long? You said that last June they agreed and they thought they had something in hand. What's taken so long?
Well, I mean, the deal got pulled off the table, and that left a lot of bitterness and a lot of unhappiness on the part of the men's union. Again, the union leadership agreed a deal, or thought they had agreed a deal with Will Wilson. They thought that he was going to be the decision maker that was going to agree to this particular deal. But then when it got presented to the board of directors, they said no. So I think there's a little bit of confusion and a lack of trust, I would say, on the men's side, just in terms of, well, if we agree to a deal again, who's to say that the board isn't going to, turn their backs on that deal as well? So I think there's been a real breakdown in trust. There was talk of them going on strike. Obviously, that didn't happen, but that was a real setback in terms of the men's CBA, and obviously that's had a little bit of a cascade effect in terms of the women's CBA and trying to come to some kind of agreement on these World Cup bonuses.
Jeff, let's get into this presidential election. We got the incumbent, Cindy Parlow-Cone, and the person that she replaced, Carlos Cordero, going head-to-head, as you mentioned, this coming Saturday at the AGM for U.S. Soccer down in Atlanta. Let's start with a very basic question about this election, because I don't feel like a lot of people know this. Who actually votes, and where is the power, kind of the deciding power in all this concentrated? Because we keep hearing a lot about the Athletes Council.
Yeah, there's 4 main constituencies. There's the youth state associations, there's the adult amateur state associations, there's what's called the Pro Council, which includes NWSL, USL, MLS, and then there's the Athletes Council. And there was some legislation passed at the congressional level last year that required the athletes to have 1/3 of the vote in any kind of national council or on the board of directors. And so some changes have been made in terms of the voting structure and the makeup of the board of directors in the USSF to make sure they, abide by that particular legislation, that particular law that's now been passed. So right now, the bulk of the power lies with the Athletes Council. Again, that's 33.33% of the weighted vote that they're going to be able to wield. In the past, the Athletes Council has tended to vote as a block, where they decide this is the candidate we're going to get behind. This is the person that we're going to throw our lot in with. And 4 years ago, that was Carlos Cordero. But a year ago in the vice presidential election, that was the first sign that maybe the Athletes Council wasn't going to vote as a block going forward. They didn't on that occasion. Is that it's not going to be entirely as a block this time. There have been some public statements from Danielle Slayton, from Lori Lindsay, saying they're backing Cindy Parlow-Cone, but whether the rest of the Athletes Council is going to fall in line with that or agree with that, that still remains to be seen. I'm told that there's some meetings taking place later this week to try to hash that out and see if they are going to vote as a block or if they're going to allow people to kind of go their separate ways.
Jeff, you're one of the few reporters who's actually been able to make contact with both candidates. What are the few of the key differences between both?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
I said you're one of the few reporters who's actually been able to make contact with both candidates. What are the few key differences between both candidates? Excuse me.
Well, if you talk to Carlos Cordero, he's basically saying, hey, the grassroots people at the state associations for both the adult council and the youth council, they asked me to do this. They want me to run again. They're not happy with the way that the World Cup in 2026 is being managed in terms of, the sponsorships and the business opportunity and the opportunity to really grow the sport in this country. So he's basically saying, hey, I wouldn't be doing this if the grassroots folks hadn't asked me to do this. Cindy Parlow-Cone is saying we need to look forward, not backward. And, she's pointing to some real wins in recent weeks, just in terms of, the equal pay lawsuit getting settled, and then the new media rights deal. I think some of the details of the media rights deal still need to be kind of picked apart and analyzed. But, those are two significant wins that Cindy Parlow-Cone can have. Now, whether that's enough to make anybody change their vote, I think that still remains to be seen. But Cindy Parlow-Cone's all about looking forward and talking about, hey, what a good job she did during a pandemic and trying to basically manage the Federation's finances during a very difficult period. Carlos Cordero saying, hey, this World Cup in 2026, this opportunity is being squandered, so that's what I'm running again.
I'll tell you one of the differences, Herc. Cindy Parlow-Cone will do interviews. Carlos Cordero won't. He did a Q&A with Jeff. He never responded to our request to come on Futbol America, as you saw from one of our colleagues, Grant Wall. Also tried to reach out to him, couldn't get him on the record. Same for our good friends, Total Soccer Show. There's a lot of people that Carlos Cordero is turning down to talk. I don't know if you can want to be president of something when you want to hide in the shadows. All right, let's get down to brass tacks. You and I were in Orlando, Jeff, for the last one of these, and I think we did a podcast just before, and you might have gotten it right. I definitely got wrong who I thought was going to win. Who do you think is going to win this time around?
Ooh, I mean, everybody I've talked to, that I've said, hey, how do you handicap this election? All anyone will say is that it's going to be close. I think Cordero's got like a built-in 36-40% of the vote constituency there. And so I think a lot of it's going to depend on the Athletes Council. I think Cindy Parlow-Cone will probably just shade it. But I mean, this is one of those proverbial elections that can go either way. And I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see, how people line up and what candidate they line up behind. But again, we'll know more on Saturday. And, it's going to be, especially if Cordero wins. I mean, if he comes back into office, it's going to be interesting to see how sponsors react. It's going to be interesting to see how the women's national team reacts. I mean, they have this settlement, but certainly, at least in their public comments, they don't have too many good things to say about Carlos Cordero.
All eyes then on Atlanta this weekend as we get to find out who will be the next president of U.S. Soccer.